All right, what is up, everybody? We're back for another webinar Wednesday. I got my boy Ronnie with me again today. How's it going, bud?
What's going on, man? Happy to be here.
Ronnie's just like running in here like right before the time. He's like, "Oh man, I'm just putting out fires today. It's one of those days for us. It happens." But no, it's great. Thanks for joining us again today. So last time Ronnie and I we kind of got into a little bit of basically being prepared, being ready for what happens when that you're doing those lead generation things and your phone starts ringing. So being prepared for that, be practicing, being ready for what happens when those things, when that phone starts ringing, how you can react on the other side. So that's a big thing with that. And today we're going to kind of take it from there. Of what's that kind of next step? I'll kind of just like kind of do a little, I guess, a little setup from like kind of where we left off and everything. So this is kind of how I like to handle my phone calls, stuff like that. As we talked last week, Ronnie's like, "Hey, this is the way that Brian sounds. I sound completely different, so I wrote my
Right.
script different. This is how I kind of handle it. I'm going to answer the phone, just say, "Hey, hi, this is Brian from Simple Quarters. How can I help you?" And basically just kind of get to know them a little bit, but then just kind of throw it out of just like, "Hey, I know a lot of people that reach out to us. They want to know who we are, how we do what we do." Kind of the proper or the offer that we're able to put on your house. Do you have those same types of questions for us? They might say yes and move on from there. And then I'm usually just going to break into it like, "Hey, that sounds great." Basically, what I'm going to do in this for this first part of this conversation is just get to know get to figure out whether we're a good fit for each other. Do you have 4 or 5 minutes? I can ask you a couple questions, and we'll move on from there. So that's really what it is, giving them a time frame, kind of setting up what's going to happen in this call, maybe just throwing out, "Hey, these are the types of questions that you're probably going to ask. I'm going to go ahead and call them out and see what's going on there." So that's where we're going now. So this person is like basically said like, "Yes, I can have a conversation with you for 4 to 5 minutes to figure out kind of what's going on and things like that." So basically kind of this next step is I basically kind of break this phone call into two different parts.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a part where you're going to be kind of like building rapport and finding out information about the
Right.
property, figuring out, hey, if you really are a good fit. And then you're going to kind of do that setup thing again. Like, do you have an extra, maybe like 8 to 10 minutes? I can go a little bit deeper with you, that type of thing. So that second part is kind of where we get into kind of their motivation, the deal killers, the asking price, and setting up those kind of next steps and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie, before we dig into that first part of this conversation of just like building rapport, figuring out information about the property, do you have any like just kind of tidbits of anything of maybe kind of making that transition from that initial first minute of the call into kind of this building rapport / finding out information about the property type of thing?
Yeah. One of the things that one of the asks that I have as I'm transitioning is just verifying, like, hey, once we know their name, and then we've made sure that they know our name. Like, hey, Joe, I just want to just start off real quick. Just make sure that I have the right contact information for you. Can you confirm that for me? And then just let them give you that information again. It's very simple, basic, but also very critical because if you miss that, and you're trying to call it back because maybe it's hot and you got the number switched around, you can't get in contact with them. It's all down here from there because now you got to leave. You can't get in contact with it, so it's kind of hard to track them back down. I mean, but one of those things that kind of help transition to that information gathering mode is just confirming contact information and email if they happen to use it again, and you kind of fill that out. Definitely use that.
Yeah, definitely. Just kind of going off of what you just said right there. One thing I like to do is I like to use their name just a couple times. So it's just like they know that I know who they are, but then I'm also just used to saying their name, which is really important. Finding out the contact information is great. I've kind of learned that too. A lot of people are kind of hesitant about giving out their email address and things. So instead of just saying, "Hey, do you have any, what's the best email address for you," or anything like that, I just say, "Hey, when we need to send you some documents, what email do I send those to?" Then they're kind of like, "Oh, okay, this is legit," and they kind of go on from there versus just saying like, "Hey, what's your email address?"
Mm-hmm.
Some people seem to, but like, "Hey, I'm going to need to send you documents, so this is a fit. So where do I send them to?" And they're usually okay with that. So
Right.
have them spell out their email address is kind of a big thing too. I know it's really easier. I usually actually just go with, "Hey, do you mind texting me your email?" Is usually how I go about it. It's a great way to go. So no, that's great. So yeah, so you're going to verify that contact information, possibly get an email address if you can and stuff. And then you're going to kind of move into that. So such an important thing is that rapport building. And I like to do that through finding out information about their property. I know a lot of people, sometimes it can get a little awkward sometimes when you're just, "Well, how are you doing today? How's your day going?" That comes off salesy to me. I know some people are really good about it. Maybe they're better than me about it. I like to build rapport through them by asking information about their property.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually just start off with like, hey, thanks a lot. I'm glad we're having this phone call. Can you do me a favor and can you just describe your house to me, kind of what's going on with it? Maybe one of the first things I might say is like, hey, if I'm standing at your front door and I walk right in, like, what am I going to see? How's that going to go? And that type of thing. That way, as they're explaining stuff to me, as they're going through stuff, I'm able to ask them, questions based off of what they say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be better off, I guess, of like feeding off of them to be able to ask my questions and stuff like that. So I usually just start off with like, hey, if I walk in your front door, what am I going to see? What's there? What's that first room I'm going to walk into? And they can kind of just give me that tour as they're like kind of describing things. And that'll allow me to like, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, a living room. You got it. Oh, okay. You got a big screen TV in there.
Right.
They do. Are you a sports fan? That I'm going to play off of that. That's how I handle it. And things like that. Just Ronnie, is your, I know this is like 2 or 3 minutes into this conversation and stuff, but what are some tricks that you have for that too, of just building rapport and just getting to know the people that you're talking to?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're definitely listening for those context clues. What are they telling you about the house? Okay. So there's a playpen that's kind of in the way that they're complaining about, or maybe they're saying, well, the paint's off the wall because, the kids have been going crazy. Oh, so we have kids. Yeah. So tell me about the kids. How many kids do you have? The grandkids come over all the time and they're just, so we have, so now that we know that this is a family gathering house based on just some of the details that they're giving me. I literally had a phone call today talking with a gentleman that bought a house for his father. And he's telling me about, everything he's done to it. He's talking about the garage. As he's talking about the garage, he's like, there's 4 Harleys out there. I wouldn't have known that hadn't he told me, but now I know, hey, he's trying to, granddad is 74 years old. He likes riding Harley. He's having issues of, trying to let that go. So, I mean, he's already given me context just about just walking me through the house about things that are in there, and dad wants to, now go to Florida, on the Harley, but dad is 74 years old. Don't think we need to do that. But, for us to kind of have those talks, about transition life and just, having that father-son bond and listening to that. And then again, making comments about that, affirming him in that, how awesome it is that he has a relationship with his father and, how, it can kind of be of a tug of war, but, he's helping his father transition, in the same way too, understanding that we're just there to help, and so, we're getting on the same page with, helping father get to Florida and let go of these 4 Harleys, so by the end of the month. So, just picking up on all of those little details, finding ways to get on the same page, listen, and find that commonality to make you a person, not just a salesy guy that wants to buy my house.
Yeah, man, that's so important. I'm glad you even said that. That little tidbit right there is so great, because what we're going to do with that later on, when we are at that opportunity where we can make that offer, we're going to bring that right back up. It's like, hey, our goal, the reason that I want to give you this offer and the reason that my number is, I want to make sure you can get to where you can work with that, where you can get with granddad, go down to Florida, hang out with him, whatever it may be. You're gonna use that. That's gonna be part of that motivation. That's gonna be part of that offering process later on too. So very important. Then you hear little things like that. Like Ronnie brought up that, the information before of like, oh, there's paint off the wall right there. They're gonna say little things like that. If they're talkative at all, they're going to give you some little tidbits like that. Like, well, what happened with the paint? Did you, are the kids chipping it off the wall? Or they might be like, oh no, I just haven't done any maintenance on it forever, or something like that. It needs a new paint job. Oh, okay, it needs a new paint job, but what else does it need? It's going to open up to some other conversations that you can have. So as you're building the rapport, you can also ask just a bunch of questions about the house, and you're all gauging this on like how talkative are they?
Right.
Are they ready to talk, or are they just like, it's 3 bed, 1 bath, that's it? You're going to be able to say, you're going to be able to sense how they're doing. If they're telling you some more stuff, feed into it. Keep going. Oh yeah, thanks a lot. I got a few more minutes on this call. Do you have enough time to kind of get into this? Just be respectful of their time. Make sure they realize that you appreciate the information that they're giving. Such an important thing. And then as you're getting into it, there's definitely some questions that you want to find out about the house. And what you're doing during this point is qualifying it.
Right. Does
this even make sense for us to go after this house, to get this property under contract? Does it make sense for them to even be talking to me? This sounds like a great house. Why aren't you listening? Like you're figuring out those kind of things right now. So I know one of my like go-to questions that I love to have is basically like, the point of, I like to ask them like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that your house needs like everything possible done to it, and 5 being that it is ready to go on HGTV, how would you rate your house?
Yep.
That's one of the things I love to go to. And I know I've kind of even, kind of been like pushing you guys, Ronnie and James, to go and asking that question and stuff like that. So Ronnie, can you kind of give just a little insight on that type of thing? Like how some questions that maybe you're asking or some things like that, of like asking them to rate their property and those types of things that help out with building their rapport and finding out information about the property as well.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, so you're asking those how and how questions and, where questions or when questions, as far as just, the repairs and roof and furnace and different things like that. But one of the questions that we have been, and this comes from a motivational interviewing background. So, if you're sitting on here, look up motivational interviewing. I'm telling you, just Google it and just find it. It's a tool that is used in counseling, and when you're talking to these people, it's kind of like is a counseling conversation because you're counseling through solutions about their home. But one of the things in motivational interviewing is to rate. So when you're rating them, saying 1 to 10, 1 to 5, I asked that question today to a guy, and he was like, I would rate it a 7, but because of the paint and the things like that, it's more of a 5, and that helps them kind of get more realistic to what's really going on, what the value of the house might be, and then also to kind of help you gauge exactly where the house might be as well, and trying to figure out if this is a good fit because based on what they say. Now, sometimes somebody might think it's a 10, and you go out and look at it, it's a 2, and that's fine, and
you will have that.
You're going to have that, and that's okay. But just even the example today when I asked that question, the guy, we were kind of talking a little bit about it, and that helped him kind of come down on what he thought his asking price would be, and he came down $25,000 just after the first rate question. He like, well, actually, I kind of think it's more maybe 70,000 as opposed to 95,000, just based on that. But again, as you're digging in, rolling with the punches, listening for those context clues, affirming the good things about the house that you hear, you're really going to be good as far as just getting that information, building that rapport, getting the context of what's going on in that house, so that you know what's going on, and also to get the seller to kind of see things from your eyes as well, objectively.
Yeah, that's great. So, kind of during this process, that's this first part, you're basically kind of gauging, you're qualifying this lead by basically like, is it, is this person seem like somebody I'm going to be able to work with?
Right.
Number one, you're going to be able to see, hey, can I build a rapport with them? Are they looking at, just like I said, is it somebody that I can work with? But then also, does this property make sense for me to go after? Should this be a retail listing, or is this like something that is this outside of my wheelhouse? Is this something that I'm not able to do? So you're doing those things through that conversation, through asking these questions about the property, building the rapport and things like that. And then one of my last qualifying questions is something that I always like to know is kind of like where their equity stance is on that property. Yep. Does it make sense in that way? The way I usually just go about asking that is like, hey, so if we do agree to kind of work with each other, is there going to be some kind of a lien that I have to pay off, or taxes or a mortgage? Is there going to be anything financially that I'm going to have to pay attention to if we do this deal together? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my last little bit of kind of like how I'm qualifying. I'm going to make sure it's in my wheelhouse, that the property makes sense for us to go after, but does the equity make sense too, or is there too much that they're going to have to, that I'm going to owe on, or that they're going to have to pay off? Does it make sense right there? And those are kind of those first just set of qualifying things. And Ronnie, with that, let me ask you, is kind of when you're asking those questions about, kind of their equity stance, or how much they have left to pay on the house, or their taxes, anything like that, what percentage would you say, like, people that maybe like get offended by that, or people that are like open to kind of talking about that, or do they know they're usually going to have to talk about that kind of stuff?
They know for a fact that they're going to have to ask it. Now, there are some people that are just like little bears in cages and just don't want to give out any information, but in how you ask the question really matters. So when I'm asking those type of questions, my voice pitch is a little higher, and I'm also making sure that my tone is a little slower, so that they know that I'm nice and becoming, but also too, I want that information. So when I'm asking them the question, I'm saying, so John, thanks for telling me everything about the house, but should we agree on terms, and price? Is there anything that I have to pay off, or anything I have to pay off and keep in mind as we're doing this? And then I get quiet. And then we just let the quietness kind of just, well, yeah, I got a loan about $35,000 on it, and I need to take, and that's fine. That's good. But, but again, no one really gets like combative about it, as long as you just prep the question, ask it right, and be quiet. They'll tell you, because they know that this is a financial transaction. So these things are going to be disclosed, whether upfront or at the title company. We're going to have to find out anyway. So. As long as you build that rapport, that bridge to get that information should be okay.
Yeah. And I would say with all this stuff, and this is something that if you've ever like talked to Ronnie or you like kind of work with him in any way or something like this is something that he always brings up. And I love the fact that he brings this up because it's so very important of how it is of like ask the question and then just be quiet. And I know when I first got into this business, the first few times I did that, it would be awkward. It would be a little like I'm a talker. So I'm used to being, I'm a teacher. I'm used to being in front of people, like kind of giving my opinion, talking and stuff like that. That's who I am. So it was awkward for me to just like kind of ask a question and then be quiet. But the thing of it is you need to do that because they need to realize like, oh, I need to talk. I need to provide information in this conversation. And they know that going in, but they're shying off about it. They're going to try to get you to talk as much as you can because that's what they're trying to do. They're in an uneasy situation.
Right.
Part of their job is to make sure you're kind of easing that kind of stance on their uneasiness. And you're just like, hey, I'm going to be quiet. It's going to be a little uneasy for you, but you need to talk now. And I'm going to hear you. I'm going to listen to you, which is a big key. And then you can go from there to help problem solve and stuff. So, all right. So we're kind of at that point now where you've been working on building the rapport. We've been finding out information about the property, possibly have found out their equity stance too, or any tax things and mortgages, things like that. This is usually the point by this, I know whether this makes sense for us to go after or not. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of where this transition comes into of where I'm just going to put it out there like, hey, Ronnie, I am interested. I think I am interested in this property. We don't buy every property we go after, but I would like to ask you some more questions if you have some time for it. It's going to be a little bit longer. So do you have an extra like 8 to 10 minutes that we can talk a little bit more on some stuff about your property right now? And then that's where I know that like, hey, I'm finished with this thing. I'm ready to move on to the next step. Kind of lets them know of like, hey, Brian's ready to go to that next level with me. I've passed this level. And then I do like to throw out them too. If it makes sense for you, let's kind of continue this conversation and stuff. Cause sometimes you'll have people like, I don't know about this, or can I call you back tomorrow and things like that. You just letting them know of where you stand, where they stand. I think is really important, and letting them know like, hey, this part of it is finished. Now we're going to get a little deeper with this. Right. So, and I think that's really important. So Ronnie, as you're transitioning from that kind of beginning stage to like them realizing like, hey, we're ready to move this to the next level. We're ready to transition. What's some input you have for that?
Again, it's tone of voice, because and if you listen to Brian kind of shifted it because it's just kind of natural, but because we rehearsed it so much, but you're just slowing the pace down, getting your, DJ FM voice, just be letting know like, okay, we're moving more to the meat and potatoes of the deal, because we are getting more serious in our conversations. So just being cognizant of that. And then like Brian said, just getting that permission, like, hey, is it okay if we just talk a little bit deeper? Because I think this might be something here. Maybe might need to set a walkthrough, but we just want to get a little more context. And then just getting that permission from them goes a long way. And then you can move on to the next step. And then more, I think we're going to move into just talking about the motivations. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, I was reading the comments.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. And keep on commenting because we definitely will come back to them. But because we're getting into the motivation. And so one of the things that I always do is summarize the information that you have. When you summarize the information that you already have, it lets them know that you're listening. And then if you're a person like me, you need to repeat the information. So it kind of helps you have a picture of what's going on in there. And then once you've summarized everything, then we can kind of move on. And so one of my, hook, line, and sinker things is I heard everything's going on with the property. Thanks for telling me about the paint and the Harleys that you have going on and getting down to Florida. All of that makes sense. But I mean, why would you go this route as opposed to going another route, and then we kind of talked a little bit. He kind of gave me the prices. Okay, but why at that price? It makes sense for you to list it. Why would you call me? Like what happened there? And I get quiet and I listen. And so then, the guy literally started talking and he talked himself. Again, $25,000 just by me asking questions. He just talked himself right. He's like, yeah, I think I'm more so around this just by asking the right questions because he knew that he didn't want to go through the listing process. He didn't want to go because things are kind of weird and he'd rather go through something that's sure, but he just wanted his price, which is good. That's great. But you have to ask this question to kind of get the motivation, figuring out what's going on. But when you summarize everything that you've heard, that lets the seller know that you've listened. It builds trust and rapport with them, that you understand, you heard them, and it allows them to feel more comfortable opening up to you, because you might be the only person that listened to them in a while. Maybe they were busy, don't have anybody to get on the phone and talk to. So now they have an opportunity to talk with you, and you've built that rapport and built that trust. And so now they're going to come to you and talk to you, even as other wholesalers and things that are competing for the house. That's great, but you set yourself apart because you listened, you summarized, and you're asking the right questions.
No, that's great. And that's really where you get to. You figure out what that motivation is. That's your goal, is figuring out why they want to sell it. One of the things, and kind of going through that transition too, like we talked about, Ronnie's talking about using he's going to slow it down, use that, FM DJ voice a little bit, let them know that like, hey, this is a different serious conversation. If that's easy to do on the phone, like kind of change that tone, let them know like, hey, let's move to that next level like we were talking about. If I'm in person, if maybe this conversation has happened at their house, this is the point where I'm saying like, hey, is there a place where we could go sit down? Can we sit down at your table? Can we sit down at your front porch? You're changing your tone on the phone. And in person, you're going to change kind of the situation of like, hey, let's sit down. This is going to be a little bit more serious. And then, Ronnie gave some really good feedback on kind of figuring out what that motivation is of repeating some of the stuff that they said before, of getting to that point of like, hey, I know you want to do this. Let's talk about this now. Same thing. I always like to give some kind of a positive about their house or about the neighborhood or something like that, and say, you know what, I really like this neighborhood. I've bought and sold, a lot of houses around here. This is a great neighborhood. Just out of curiosity, like why are you gonna sell, or why do you want to sell, or why do you need to sell? You just kind of throw it into them and just being like, so why are you selling the property or something like that? Instead of like being high energy, just kind of slowing it down, of being like, why would you consider selling this one? Because it seems like it's in a really good neighborhood. It seems like it's in a good area. It seems like you've done a lot of work to this house. Anything like that, kind of giving that positive, and then posing it as a true question to them. They're going to tend to give you that true motivation and get behind it. You might have to dig a little bit, but you can really get behind it. And I think, Ronnie, you gave some really good tips of just slowing things down and really getting into that and figuring out what that motivation is. And then always, this is where that active listening comes in. Yeah. So big, of really listening to what they're saying, asking them some questions about that to follow up with it. This is too, I know you brought up the FM DJ voice. This is where I always revert back to Chris Voss. This is like, hey, I'm definitely going to mirror right here. I'm definitely going to, put some labels on things. It sounds like to me, you need to get out of this neighborhood because you don't necessarily feel safe here. Right. Or it seems like to me, if you need to sell this house to be able to move in with your daughter, or move to Florida, or drive down to, go on a Harley trip, or whatever it may be, of really where you're pulling out that mirroring and labeling. And we can probably do a whole episode on those two things, right, just back and forth and stuff. But, kind of transitioning in, let's kind of move on to maybe that next step. So you're figuring out what that motivation is, following up, asking those questions. One of the things I definitely like to do at this point too, and I feel like a lot of wholesalers maybe shy away from this a little bit, is figuring out what those deal killers are.
Man,
once I figure out what that motivation is, I'm going to jump into like, so you can sell to me or anything like that, but have you thought about listing it? Have you considered doing this? Is there anybody that maybe, would your brother and sister be upset with you? Is there anybody that would be upset with you if you sold this house? What are those things that could kill that deal? I know you want to get it under contract right now, and that's fine. But being able to figure out what those things are going to hold it up, because it's easy to get a property under contract. It's those things that are going to show up in 2 weeks that are going to tie up that property that you want to figure out as soon as you can. So I know, Ron, we talk a lot about this and things, but maybe just give a little insight on what you see from just calling out those deal killers and just coming out with it right from the start.
Listen, there's an elephant in the room, and you have to address the elephant in the room. I know a lot of times the different presentation, is presented as a cookie cutter. Oh, you just walk through, ask, offer, boom, contract. If you do not talk about the elephants in the room, the elephants will kill the deal every time near or around the closing table. So, there was a situation this past week. I was talking with and I'll admit my own mistake sometimes because I forgot to do this. I'm talking with this lady. Everything's good. She says the price. We're ready to go. I'm, ready to sign paperwork. And she was like, oh, wait, I have to ask my children about this. And I was like, oh, my God. I completely forgot to ask about the deal killers. And so, and then come to find out, that they were the deal killer. Like, you know what? No, we have a friend that wants to sell the house. But had I addressed that, I at least could have been able to get them on the same page or get them to the table or make sure that they were involved, so that they always know. So I'm just not some alien outside, because the person that you're talking to might not be the real decision maker. There is very well possible, and this has happened before. We are talking to people that are not on title, but they're just the voice in the house. So they make all the decisions, even though when it comes to title work, nothing happens there. So you want to ask, is there anyone else that needs to be involved? Anything else that need to pay? Is there anything else we need to talk about? Any unknowns? And when you address that things, are there any competition? That's okay too. Is anyone else coming out to the house? I went out to a house this past week. Guy showed me 4 different letters, from other wholesalers around the city. And we know that we're in a competition, and that's okay too, to have that conversation with them, to have that confidence, because ultimately, again, he sees the mailers, he responded to him. Well, who is he going to sell to? The person. So as long as you're okay with addressing those things, having the confidence to get those things out in the open, and it's okay. It's uncomfortable. I'm telling you, it was a little uncomfortable seeing all those folks. Like, oh my God! But it's okay to talk about those things and address those things. It is okay.
That's what we refer to them as. We refer to them as deal killers, because they might not kill that deal that day that you're talking to them right there. It will kill the deal, the next day or the next day, things like that. Because right there, Ronnie's given that situation. It's okay to be like, hey, is anybody else looking at this property and or anything like that? Like, it's okay to ask those things, because they're thinking it. The seller knows it. It's holding them up. The more you're aware of, the more information you have, the better you're off doing. Because Ronnie's the same exact situation of like, this person was holding off because he had other people coming out and look at the house. Ronnie said, here's my offer. It sounds like they're not making you a top priority. Like, I'm here. I'm ready to do it. I think we're getting that contract, so it's all right. So it works out. Having those things come out, and it's okay to address them. If you're thinking about it, if you're worried about it, they're thinking about it too. And those are the things that can kill the deal later on. So then, all right. So we've talked about motivation. We've talked about some of those deal killers. That last piece then is just kind of figuring out what that asking price might be. I usually never go the route of, hey, so what are you asking for this property? My line is usually like, what are properties in this neighborhood selling for? Are you aware of that? Do you know what's going on? Because then they can give me an example. I would say 50% of the time, they can give you an example of something that's been sold in that neighborhood, or kind of, because they've done some research. They know what Zillow says and things like that. And they might just come out and say, hey, well, Zillow says it's worth this, and that's fine. But if I approach it as like, do you know what other houses are selling for in this neighborhood? They might say, yeah, the one down the street sold for this. And then it comes back to what we talked about before of that rating scale. Can you're going to put those two things together and correlate that together and stuff. And sometimes people are straightforward of like, oh yeah, I'm asking this right away and stuff like that. People will play the game of, hey, well, no, I don't want to tell you my asking price is. I want you to throw out a number first. And that's okay. That's fine too. But at least asking like, hey, by not asking actually, hey, what are you asking for this property? You're just saying, do you know what properties in this neighborhood are going for? Right. They might be able to tell you something. Then you say, oh, really? Do you know what was that house like? Do you know, was it 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom? Would you value your house more or less than that? Why? If that's going to give you a little bit more information and kind of go back to that, helping out with the rating scale type of thing as well. So Ronnie, do you have any feedback on that as well, man?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a big bridge because you're having a lot of direct conversation, and then sometimes the seller might feel a little uncomfortable if you're that direct, like, what are you asking? But in order to kind of be, to kind of help a wrap around and be a little more supportive, what's going on? What are houses selling for in your neighborhood? Are you aware of that? When you're asking that question, it gets them to kind of think. And then, like Brian said, it gives them an opportunity to kind of compare, because maybe they do know, maybe they don't know, maybe they do know and just don't want to tell you, and that's fine. And so then once they kind of tell you that information, and so then you just kind of ask, okay, so houses are selling for about $120,000 in your neighborhood. Based on what we're seeing in your house, are you seeking that, are you seeking something in that range or a little lower? Like where are you at as opposed to what you're seeing in your neighborhood? And shut up. And see what they say. Sometimes people tell you, no, that's what I want. So then the next conversation is, well, for that price, I'm going to definitely tell you need to get a realtor, and that's okay. If something changes, give me a call, and they might say there's something a bit lower, that's more of a cash price, and then you want to obviously bridge that and talk a little bit deeper. But just asking what was going on in the area and then walking it home to what's going on with their house is definitely a safer way to kind of help get the information that you need.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And then kind of that last little piece is I'm going to tell them what the next steps are of like, I'm just going to kind of break it down of like, hey, thank you so much for this information. If you feel like I'm still a good fit, like I just need some time. I need some time to analyze this deal. And you might have been able to do some homework on the front end and stuff like that, but I'm basically going to kind of tell them what's happening next. Do I need time to do this? Do I need, an hour to give them an offer? Do I need to go out to my car and make a phone call to give them an offer? Do I need a week? Do we need a week to think about it? Do they need to give me permission to give them an offer? Whatever it may be, you're going to talk about whatever steps happen next is going to be that next thing that you're going to do and that next thing you're going to take place on. So, that kind of wraps it up a little bit for today. We got through it, Ronnie. I thought we're going to have to break it almost a 2-part episode. And there's more stuff to this. We can definitely go in depth, but really we're kind of recap kind of what we're talking about here. When you're talking about that phone call that you have, they have that call coming in, breaking in kind of the 2 different sections, making sure that it's in your wheelhouse. That's a property that you want to go after, that the equity part makes sense for you. And then kind of that next part, that transition of really figuring out the motivation, the deal killers, kind of figuring out what that asking price might be as well, and then informing them of the next steps. Always keep them informed. Always keep them knowing like what's going to happen next. Hey, I'm going to call you at 10 o'clock tomorrow to give you an offer. Are you okay with that? Whatever it may be, letting them know what you're going to do next helps them out tremendously, just keeping them informed. What we're going to get into next week, kind of do elaborate before we go on to the next step of what's going on from here. We're just going to kind of take a look at some of the things that can happen during these conversations.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we handle those conversations with people to say, hey, I just want an offer. Like, what's going on? Just give me an offer. You send me a postcard, give me an offer. Those people that expect retail price for their property, how we handle those types of things. So all those types of conversations that come up during this, how we handle it, what we do. We're not always the best at it, but we've made some mistakes. We've got some properties. We've bought and sold multiple properties. So we do have some expertise. We do have experience in this. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we're going to handle next week. So with that, Ronnie, you got any last words of wisdom or anything, man?
Yes. Google motivational interviewing, and then also look up active listening. That is your homework for this week.
So awesome stuff. I like this. Assigning homework. As a former teacher, I really appreciate this. You got some e-learning going on. So no, great stuff. So thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Later.